emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. That was the poet and legendary reggae musician Bob Marley. I'm the Great Baldini, and these are Unintended Consequences. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you're joining us from. We're glad you're here for our fifth installment of Unintended Consequences, where the music is original, the content is organic, and the possibilities are endless. Stay with us for more Unintended Consequences. All right. Good morning. And again, let's just say in Texas, if it ain't the windmill, it's the pigs, right? So it's always, something going wrong. Hey, guys, welcome. Welcome again this morning. And glad you're joining me this morning. We'd probably be a little shorter than some of the others today. Had a lot of stuff going on, and we're trying to get just a whole bunch of things happening here. I got a wide variety of people that I'm talking to over the next week. So that's pretty cool. And we'll be getting out some information and, a little bit different take on things. But this morning, we're talking about breaking free from misapprehension. That is the misunderstanding or seeing the world in a way that is not accurate. And I think one of the things that we can all agree on is that at one point or another, we all had this same view, or at least we did not see the things the way we see it now. One of the things that has become abundantly clear throughout this process of doing the Awakening Project, which again, if you're unfamiliar with it, something I began after conversations with Wayne McCroy, Jason Lindgren, Crow, and a few other folks about something that I think we all have wondered from time to time, especially if we have tried to share this information with others and get immediate and vociferous pushback, which is what makes the difference between those who awaken and those who do not. When we sometimes go online and find other people who are like-minded, they may have very similar or at least close understanding of the way things work as we do. I mean, certainly one of the things that I've said numerous times is that the truther movement or the truth community is something of a misnomer in that we spend far more time breaking apart lies than we do actually coming to anything that we could consider truth. Because as things go, they have done such a good job of hiding and destroying the truth that really there's a lot of speculation that's involved. There's a lot of hypothesis. We just don't know. They've hidden it from us. And so the truth is a very difficult thing to know, but we can do a pretty good job. It's often been said it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And what we can prove is that what we've been told is, for the most part, a fabrication. It's a lie. Everything from the history of man to the nature of mankind to where we live and what's beyond us. So it is that's something that we can certainly prove, I think, demonstrably so, especially if you take the time to do the research and really think things through and you really use your mind rather than trying to defend a position. I think most of you are familiar with Crow and his tagline, which is that belief is the enemy of knowing. And that was one of the things that I think first kind of attracted me to listening to his channel or becoming kind of a member there was many of my own really epiphanal moments came on the heels of having to let go of some preconceived notion or some powerful belief that I had that I wanted to defend. And I wanted to put it through the process of, it can't be, right? And oddly enough, even to this day, I still find that many of the topics that I approach initially seem crazy, right? When you first look at it, you're like, oh, come on. And then you look into it and you go, oh my gosh, there's a there, right? There is the fingerprint of these guys all over it. And without, getting too deep, I think we can, certainly that was my initial reaction when I approached cosmology. The first thing I saw at the end of like 2014, it was October of 2014 when I saw a video, and I'd kept seeing it in my suggested videos it said something about flat Earth on it, right? And I was just like, oh, come on, really? And it was a high altitude balloon footage, and there was no narrative, no voiceover, just high altitude balloon footage, about 20 minutes of it. And at about 128,000 feet with a dog cam logo on it. And I watched that. I was like, what are you guys trying to prove? And then I watched it, and I thought, I could see specular highlights, right? And the sun appeared close and local. And I was like, what the heck? And that's not even looking at the horizon. I was just like, what is going on here? And back in the day, the algorithms on YouTube would actually suggest other videos. And so it didn't take very long. It just kind of confused me a little bit. So with, just in moments, I started looking at Eric Dubé's 200 Proofs, and right away, I think the hair on the back of my neck stood up a little bit in that I was having some cognitive dissonance between listening to this guy who was clearly scripted. The information was entirely not his. It was apparent. It was well beyond his own intellectual capacity. I'll put it that way. But it was nothing new. Certainly, most of these things were more than 100 years old. But these items they got me to think, and I was like, I've never questioned that before. I know the story, but I just never had considered really questioning it other than when I was a kid. I think, the idea of how we could be spinning and not have centrifugal force, and that I'd never seen centripetal force actually work. If you get on the ride at the state fair, the carnival, or Six Flags or whatever, and it spins around, throws you up against the wall, that's centrifugal force. I've never seen centripetal force try to pull you back into the middle. And I'd never seen mass attract mass at any scale whatsoever. I knew that they only said at a cosmic or planetary scale. And so I spent, probably 6 or 8 days trying to do math on why we could see too far. I saw some of Rod Skiba, and I, of course, like most people did, Mark Sargent's clues, and his was not a lot of real physics or anything like that in there, but primarily kind of a hypothetical. But you start walking through it, and you're like, oh man. I don't know what's going on here. This is nuts. So it actually, again, the cognitive dissonance went from I know I'm doing the math wrong to I wasn't, and then to what happens when I accept this. What happens. In fact, I think it was day 2 or 3. I had a friend of mine, and he's a pretty bright guy, and I said, hey, I'm struggling with this question. You're a bright guy. Help me figure this thing out. And he's like, what? I'm like, you know anything about optics, refraction, that sort of stuff? He's like, a little bit, not much. It's like, yeah, me too. I had to start looking into it. And why is it that we can see too far? Why can we see things that should clearly be behind the curve? And the veins on his forehead started popping, and he turned beet red, and he went, you mean flat Earth? I was like, what? Dude, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know what it is. I just want to know why there's some strange things going on here. And he got increasingly just volatile. And I thought, that is the strangest thing I've ever seen. And this had actually come just a matter of less than weeks after I had an experience where I was out working in a shop, and I was listening to the radio, which is weirdly something I don't very often do. I don't, I don't consume media much at all. But I happened to be listening to the radio, and suddenly I woke up, and the way I can explain this is I realized that I had gone a matter of moments, perhaps minutes. And I felt very much. I don't know if you've seen the movie. Let's see. Now I'm going to have a brain fart because I can picture it. Serenity, which was the movie that was made from Firefly, the television show that was too short. But the gal there, River, was in a bar, and she got triggered by a television commercial, and that set off a trigger thing and turned her into a weapon. And I had the strangest sense that this had like just happened to me. Like I had had an experience where something in the broadcast had literally set off some sort of post-hypnotic suggestion in me, and it freaked me right the fuck out. Man. I was like, okay, I'm not nuts, but that was weird. And I told my wife about it, and she was like, "Look at me." And she knows that she puts up with a lot of stuff from me, right? But she knows that when I say something seriously, that I'm serious, even if it's way out there. She will never, slap me upside the head and go, "You need to see a therapist, honey." She takes me at my word because she knows that I'm not kidding it. And so it was this really bizarre moment, and I was just going, "That is uncool." That I had a moment where something triggered me. And so then I saw this trigger in my friend when I mentioned just helping me figure out a puzzle, and he got so triggered, and I was like, that is post-hypnotic suggestion right there. That is not, again, I've mentioned before that I have in the past, briefly, but I worked as a anger management and substance abuse counselor in California. I was state certified, and most of the people there were adjudicated. But I have, I'm also since then especially, but I've always been fascinated with the human animal and how we think and the nature of who and what we are, and ontology and epistemology and learning these things. And so his reaction let me know that one of the early things that I saw as a pattern both in myself and in others is that when the response is far greater than the data coming in, when your response is much more than the situation calls for, that almost invariably indicates that you're responding to some past situation, whether that's a post-traumatic stress disorder, whether it's just an emotional response from a similar circumstance. And often what happens when it's an emotional response is that you're not in that moment. You're actually responding to a memory of a moment that has responded to another memory of a moment. And every time that it happens, it builds like a snowball until ultimately you have this triggered thing. And so somebody can just say one word. And we see this often with spouses or parents or people that are close to us and have been for a very long time, that they know where to push your buttons, right? That's what we say. They can really push my buttons because they can, with a word or just a look, take you from zero to triggered just like that. And that's a result of these things. It's a buildup over time. So you're not really in that moment. You're responding and really reacting is what you're doing. You're not really responding. You're reacting to some trigger. But I noticed that specifically with this topic, and I tested it out on a couple other people, and they had similar reactions. I thought, what in the world is making this reaction? Because that is unnatural. That is a planted reaction that's there on purpose, and it has been put within us. And this is true for a number of different topics. And I have learned over time that the crazier a quote conspiracy theory sounds, the more likely it is to have something behind it, some truth behind it. Now, we know, and you learn over time, certainly, that there is quite a bit of what we would call controlled opposition out there. That is that those people who are running the script, the best way to control something is to lead it, right? So just like in 1984, Winston finds out that O'Brien is both a leader of the opposition and a high-ranking party member. So he's controlled opposition, and the very textbook definition of that. And we see this over and over in, again, what we would call the truth community with people like Alex Jones. I don't like to point too many people out, but that's one that you can pretty clearly see. Joe Rogan, right? That they pretend to be on our side, and ultimately they're doing harm. Whether that is like Alex Jones to put a lot of truth out there, but then just some crazy stuff and just act crazy, right? They make themselves out to be insane, so it becomes easy to dismiss. And this is the very kind of thing that we see. For example, there's a video going around, Dr. Judy Misapprehension, that she's talking about her previous work with Dr. Fauci. And there's a good deal of information in it, but there's something that also feels a little off to me about it, and especially that, she still is pro-vaccination, that sort of thing. And but we immediately see coming out memes and mainstream articles that are discrediting her. Now, much of that is nonsense, but you can see how easily it would be to set something up. Well, say, for instance, the movie Behind the Curve. They got Jaron from Jaronism. They got Bob from Globebusters to appear in it by promising that they would give them fair treatment. Of course, that's not going to happen. It's just going to be a smear campaign, and you get set up. So, what happens then is that they edit it in such a way to make it look different. But overall, if you get people who are, actually intentionally a part of that, let's say, for example, I mentioned a guy earlier, Eric Dubé, and again, I think most, there are some adherents of his, but he does some really interesting, things like both cross-dressing and the fact that his girlfriend's father is a high-ranking Thai military official specifically in the intelligence community. So, and the fact that again, much of the stuff that he presents is clearly not his own research, and he was one of the very early people that came out. Now, that in and of itself may not mean anything, but the fact that very shortly thereafter, yes, the Flat Earth Society, I see you there, and also the International Flat Earth Research Society, IFRS, he joined up and then took over their website and then kicked everybody out and made a hall of shills where he claimed everybody was a shill. The very first Flat Earth International Conference, he was invited to come as a speaker, and he said, no, anybody who goes to that is a shill. It's a shill fest. And so he began calling everybody a shill, which is the one thing shills do, right, is they call everybody else a shill or say that they deserve all the credit. Sort of the same with, again, Matt Powerland, one of the early guys that came out, and yet some weird nonsense going on. Again, I'm not going to point fingers and make any specific accusations other than to say this follows the exact sort of means and methodology that we see with controlled opposition, is that they join up and then often provide a great deal of valuable information. But in addition, they do things to discredit it. For example, Savanier, Eric Dubé, was very quick to then start praising Hitler. Now, again, when you look, that's one that if you look at closely, there are some very questionable things about the narrative that we're told about World War II and everything that happened. So, sure, okay, there's that. But when you make outrageous claims that people are going to take apart, right? And you start saying that he was a good guy and stuff. I don't think any of them were good guys. And people who cause death and suffering in any capacity, anybody who's leading a country is in my opinion, once you get past a certain threshold of fame and power, you're in the club, is insofar as I can tell. So when you start praising this, and that that's going to be used to discredit all of your work, those are the kinds of things that we see that are the typical of agents provocateur or controlled opposition, which is to put out a bunch of good information and then put either sloppy research, easily discredited things, that sort of stuff in there, so that it is easy to push them by the wayside and discredit it in the mainstream media, especially by those who are already very much programmed to go along with that sort of narrative. So these are the kinds of things, again, and I am always hesitant to, let's see, I see responding to the chat here, maybe Judy M has to say she's not anti-vax. Maybe, I mean, it's certainly absolutely possible that people are what we would call diet woke, right? They, they are awake to a certain degree, but they still have certain beliefs. I'm sure if you asked Dr. Judy M, that she would tell you that the world is a globe, right? I mean, it's pretty certain. And some people, as you say, do have to, they do have to sort of go along to a certain degree so that they don't get instantly discredited. I think that's plausible. But on the other hand, again, I'll just say that it is a tactic of a controlled opposition to make something easy to discredit. Another thing that you'll find very commonly is that the media tends to use stereotyping fallacies or straw man fallacies in which they'll lump things together. So here's for example. As most people I think are in this side of the community are aware, the term conspiracy theorist itself is a weaponized term coined specifically by the CIA during the late 19th or late 1960s to discredit anybody who had any questions about the official narrative of the JFK assassination, and specifically the Warren Commission report. So they came up, cooked up the term conspiracy theorist to discredit people, and immediately made them out to be kooks and nut jobs. And you can see this very clearly if you go back and begin to look at the media of the day, and especially mainstream news. It conflates and puts together people who believe that Oswald wasn't the lone gunman, and they come out, they use the phrase magic bullet and this kind of stuff, but they immediately throw in things like UFOs and Bigfoot. Now, later on, they're now coming out and claiming that these UFO videos are legitimate. The U.S. Navy recently came out and confirmed some of these things, but as you know, for years they denied and discredited any UFO sighting. But what they did was they tried to create the appearance that people who looked into these things were nuts, and they have long continued with this narrative that those who don't believe the mainstream media account, even if they aren't looking into other things, but if they have even suspicion of it, if they question of it, then they're crazy and they have low self-esteem. And now they're even changing this to be dangerous, that if you have questions about the CV-19 narrative or vaccinations, that you are spreading dangerous information that's harmful, physically harmful to people, and going to cause them harm. And now you're a danger to yourself and others. And now the conflation, as I showed you in the news last week, or 2 weeks ago rather, episode 3, we discussed what's in the news and showed how they're conflating it with far right-wing neo-Nazi terrorists. So they're putting all these things together and framing you in such a way. I say you, presumably those of you who are here are such that you question or don't hold much value in the official narratives that we're giving, and you find holes in that. Again, presumably that's why you're here, and that's what our study is about, is what causes people to awake and versus those who don't. But again, over time, they've sort of changed the designation from being just lunacy and crazy to now the terms narcissist are used. Narcissist, low self-esteem, right-wing, neo-Nazi, terrorist, dangerous. These things are all kind of putting together, and they certainly are conflating things. For example, with patriots, and they love to throw the Q movement out there. Even though, again, most people in our community have don't really buy the Q narrative because most of the predictions haven't come true, and there's always there's never any clarity. It's always obtuse and sort of nebulous. So it becomes sort of easy to get people to imagine things on their own and do a lot of hypothesis. And again, it does that in and of itself does sort of fuel the fires of those who are more likely to speculate and hypothesize and become those who are pushing a doom and gloom, fear porn type narrative. And there are many in the truth community. And again, I'm not calling anybody out specifically. I'm just saying that they get a little excited, a little overly excited, and they start extrapolating. And I think we all do it. We all run through these thought experiments and wonder, what if? I know I do myself. I'm not big on providing prognostication and say, this is going to happen or that's going to happen. There are a few things that I think are presumably likely to occur because they've given us enough information over time with predictive programming and that sort of thing to reasonably expect it. For example, one of the things that I have mentioned several times is that it does seem likely that in order to instantiate and to make palatable Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, which is the rewilding of most, what they call rewilding of most rural areas, and to force everybody into mega smart cities, as we've seen again in most every dystopian movie sci-fi movie of the future that there is, that this is going to be predicated by a major power grid failure and blackout. There is almost no easier way that I can see to get people to easily accept and in fact beg to be put into these megacities, is that after several days, and in fact an extended period of time, a number of weeks without power, most people are going to be in a very desperate situation. These days, very few people know how to hunt or even cook, right? Without a microwave, certainly not without power. People are addicted to their devices. Not just the internet, but if the power grid were to go down, most people would be immediately incapable of helping themselves. And so the FEMA camps would be a miracle. They would be saviors. And so people show up there and they finally kind of get everybody together and knock down roving bands of, probably their own false flag type guys, and make people believe the narrative that that this is what anarchy looks like, even though anarchy literally means without a king, right? And no archy ruler king. So without a king, just like government is govern, to rule, mental, the mind, to rule the mind. It's mind control. So the words have meanings. So they present the narrative that these people are out there that are dangerous, and so the only way we can protect you and provide services are in these tightly controlled smart cities. But we have to chip you, keep a close eye on you, because we got to keep those people out, the bad people out, the good people in. And it wouldn't take but one or two generations for people to, on the inside, believe the narrative that anything outside is dangerous. So it would be suicidal to try to leave. If the guards didn't get you, you wouldn't have any way to survive. And the roving bands of, COVID or Ebola infected zombies, cannibal zombies out there will get you. And that way they can make everything outside these cities off limits entirely by penalty of death if they wanted to. This would, again, be greeted with not just little pushback, but as a savior, like the movie The Island, sure. This is, again, this is one of the few prognostications that I make, and the reason for that is because in every one of the Five Eyes countries and many more, such as South Africa, they've done what's called dark skies events, which are simulations, much like Event 201 did with the current pandemic, simulating in advance what would come throughout these things. So they've been practicing for extended period of power grid failure. And again, from what I see with these folks, is that there is very little wasted effort and momentum, much like we had with Jade Helm a few years back. They got everybody to jump up and say, oh God, martial law is coming. Well, martial law almost certainly is coming. But them practicing it gave them the opportunity to practice it, a very large exercise, but also, again, discredit and mock anybody who was nervous or questioned about it. So it gave them a 2-for-1 there, and probably, many other things that they got accomplished as well. There's always multiple angles and aspects that are going on in this sort of thing. So again, while I'm reticent to prognosticate, that's one of the few things that I see. I mean, I also see that it's likely that an alien deception is coming, where they pretend that certain beings are aliens through a variety of elements and sources, such as Project Bluebeam, that I think most of you are familiar with. If you're not, just look it up. It's not that difficult to find. So Project Bluebeam, this seems relatively an easy get because they've been telling us in predictive programming for 100 years, right, that they're coming, with both the idea that they're could be friendly and or dangerous. I think another one that may be likely is an asteroid impact, or at least what's presented as an asteroid impact, because, again, they've been telling us over time that this is going to happen, as well as there's, again, scriptural evidence for it. If you read Revelation, in Revelation 8, a great mountain all ablaze, crashing into the sea. There's several mentions of this kind of thing in the book of Revelation. An angel throws a giant millstone into the water with this kind of destruction. You also see it in Daniel 2, another book of prophecy, where there's a statue that represents kingdoms, and the very last one is the feet made of clay and iron. They don't mingle, but it gets hit by a rock cast without human hands that causes the whole thing to crumble. So again, there's some precedent for it. So I think that these are probable things that are going to occur because they've been telling us. And we can also throw in Dr. Werner von Braun, who told Carol, his assistant there, that those were two of the events, in addition to that there was going to be terrorists, right? That was going to be false, that there would be an asteroid, and there would be aliens. That's the reason we needed space weapons, and it was all fake. So again, there's multiple evidences for this. I'm not just pulling, it's not just a rectal extraction, right? I'm not just pulling it out of my butt. But again, does that mean for sure it's going to happen? Of course not. I reserve the right to be wrong at all times with all of these things because, again, it's very difficult to tease apart actual truth other than to be able to disprove some lies. But with many of these things, as I mentioned before, it is in some ways easier to take note of the certain things that either if they try to discredit it really early, mock it, or if it sounds crazy to you, because it seems as if they put in a kind of barrier, a cognitive dissonance barrier, that if it sounds crazy, let's say, for example, the idea of baby-eating lizards. Okay, well, it sounds ridiculous, right? But if you start looking at it closely, over millennia, almost every culture, in fact, has described reptilian interdimensional beings that are very powerful, that you would perhaps consider them demons, that appear, and they love the idea of child sacrifice. That's what they demand. They give people power for it. We can go back to Moloch. We can go to many cultures that had, whether it's the Mayan cultures with a feathered serpent, all these things. Look at a dragon or a reptilian, that sort of thing. It's very similar all the way across the board. That they are able to, even the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, right, speak of people who are able to present themselves as human. But it's a shimmering appearance. They shapeshift, right? So this idea of shapeshifting reptilians isn't as far-fetched when you look at it from even a physics point of view. That again, sufficiently high, sufficiently advanced rather technology is indistinguishable from magic to a culture that's not been exposed to it. So whether it's technology or whether it's a combination of technology and what we might consider magic, or that is the manipulation of the electromagnetic spectra in such a way as it manifests your will, those things, again, we've been told that magic is false, it's fake, it's fairy tale, it's fantasy. But from my perspective, this is specifically to hide it and to make it seem as though if you believe in that you're crazy. And what happens when you look at those who are, I don't want to say leading us, but those who have power and control, they certainly believe it. They certainly do things based on astrology, which we're told is poo-poo. They do magic, sex magic, which we're told magic is poo-poo. They do all of these things, which they tell us is, that we're stupid if we believe in it, right? That these are fairy tales, and this the same sort of ability to discredit things and to use plausible deniability as what they do in predictive programming. So when they put it in a movie, when they put it in a television show like The Simpsons, or when they use it, especially in comedy, it uses a psychological method, which is to make you mock it, so that you then no longer give it credibility. And they can easily say, oh, this idea. So, for example, the movie Conspiracy Theory, right? This movie puts a lot of truth in it, but also gives them the easy out of going, oh, you can't tell the difference between a movie and reality. What's wrong with you, right? If you put it in a television show and make it very clear, it becomes very easy to dismiss you as being unable to tell the difference between truth and fantasy because you saw it on TV. If you go back and look through, I've been from time to time watching old episodes of The X-Files with my wife. We were both big fans of it back in the day, and almost every episode that I've yet seen in rewatching it has some basis in fact, in truth, that they're running through all these things, and it gave them the opportunity to both use predictive programming, widen the Overton window, and give it kind of a dismissal. So yeah, exactly. When somebody says that's stupid, that's worth looking into, right? And again, I don't want to offend anybody, but it's the same thing when I was first exposed to the transgender. Other than a few that seemed pretty plausible, right? Like Michael Obama, there was a lot of evidence for that. Both in terms of the physiological approach, when you look at the brow ridge, when you look at the jawline, when you look at the dental palate, when you look at the proportions of the body, the digit ratios, the way that the curvature of the spine goes, where the Adonis belt is, the Adam's apple. When you look at these physical things, one or two, everybody's different and things happen, right? You can get a different balance of hormones and stuff. And so, not every physiological or born ginger woman is going to be, the perfect, specimen or whatever. I mean, everybody's different. Some people can have a longer ring finger, and that digit ratio, it can be a little weird. But I'm drinking my coffee too, Dawn. I'm doing exactly. I need a sip here. Hang on a second. That is some good bean juice right there. That's my methamphetamines. So, yeah, so I saw this, and when I first was exposed to it, I saw a couple of YouTube videos, and I went, "Oh my gosh, these guys!" So yeah. Anyway, Michael Obama, I saw that one, and that was a pretty good amount of evidence. And I saw some videos, and these guys were accusing everybody, right, of being trans, and I'm like, "Oh, come on, like just get over it. Don't get too excited. Don't lose your head, right?" And then really, what happened was I looked into the why. Right, so because I saw a couple that seemed fairly compelling and primarily having to do with some Hollywood people as well as some European royalty, and not just current but historically as well. And there was all kinds of rumors about it. And I thought, well, okay, well let's look and see what's going on here. And what I discovered was that if you look at the beliefs of the cabal, and again, with most of these things, it matters very little. It matters very little what we believe. It matters a great deal what they believe, right? Because they're the ones who are doing it. So that's one thing that, always this response of appeal to incredulity. Well, why would they lie? Or I can't believe anybody would do that. Well, you can't believe it because you wouldn't do it. And so you can't imagine anybody doing it. But that doesn't mean for a moment that somebody else wouldn't, especially those who are, psychopathic and sociopaths, especially those who are serving really twisted beings. Right. And so they may even be uncomfortable with doing it at first, but ultimately they get power out of it. They get some temporal power, wealth, fame out of it, and they're going to continue to do it. So what happens is that, they're doing these things and you get presented with it. Your cognitive dissonance kicks in and you're like, it just can't be. But when you look at their belief system, and one of the things, my French press too, that's how I make my methamphetamines, by the way. Way woke. That's how I do it. That's a good way to do it. The French press, right? I use Chiapas beans. I add a little bit of cinnamon and some butter. I know, and put that in the steep for about 3 minutes and 40 seconds as I heat up a little bit of heavy cream and a little bit of vanilla. That's the way I like it. Mama likes it with none of that. And I froth the cream after it's nice and warm and get a nice froth in there, and then pour the coffee in. And oh my gosh, it beats the crap out of Starbucks. Puts them to shame. Anyway, I got sidetracked by the brown food group, right? You got steak and coffee and chocolate. That was part of the brown food group. But anyway, yeah, we get presented with these ideas and they seem just fantastical, far out. Like we could never imagine anybody doing such things. But as it turns out, when you look at their belief system, right, that they believe in this idea that originally mankind was a dual aspect being, all in one, the two-faced and both genders, and androgynous, and that androgyny represents a return to this apotheosis state. So that and this goes along with what you find in many of these people who are transgendered, is that they did not do it later in life. It happened at the beginning as children. From the outset, they began presenting them as a different gender. And then what you see is that this idea of child sacrifice that's required. So imagine you're put in the situation where you have to commit to a child sacrifice, in fact, your own, to continue in this power. And you're faced with a choice, but one of these choices is you can either put the knife to their neck or you can put the knife to their crotch and change their gender and present them throughout their life as an alternate gender. And that would be, I think, a fairly easy decision to make. You get to keep the life of your child and do them. And for those who are in control, both serve just as good a purpose. They can either have the fear and blood and death from this child sacrifice, or they can push this agenda and create this gender confusion and the idea that becoming androgynous, like the Baphomet, is an apotheosis and an illumination, an enlightened state of mankind. And so once you realize what they believe and how they perceive it and what's likely going on here, then you start looking more closely and you begin looking for these elements. And I was stunned to find that certainly in the modern age, almost since at least photography, right? We're talking the late 1800s, almost every pinup girl or sex symbol that we have, certainly the really famous ones, high likelihood that they were presented as a different gender. I know it seems weird if you haven't been exposed to this, and it seems like, oh my God, right? And here's the thing: is I don't care, right? I don't have any personal feelings about those who have gender dysphoria or whatever. I actually have compassion because most of them have, comorbid mental issues. And again, I'm not saying, I'm not going to say you're crazy, but what I'm saying is most of them do present with multiple issues, and the depression and suicide rates are off the chart. Almost 40% kill themselves by the time they're 40. Whether or not they go through surgery, it's a very, very difficult situation. And again, I can even believe that because of the food and the environment that we're put in, and with all the chemicals they put in around us, it definitely messes with the growth process and with the hormones, such that, when some people say that they can't help it or that they're, born that way, I find it difficult. Really, I mean, I can make some inferences, but I would say that some people, I can't deny or dismiss somebody's experience in the same way that I ask them not to deny mine, right? With my connection and my relationship with my Creator, that is personal to me, and it's mine, it's my experience, and I've had it. So I can't deny that they've had their own experience, and I don't know what it is to be that, but I can say that I certainly can't throw it out the window as an idea. That not only is it being fostered socially and fomented socially as an idea and a concept with the LGBTQRST V964X14 Elon Musk agenda, but that it's not only being fostered socially, but it's being implemented chemically and through electromagnetic radiation as well. And through, I would suggest, the kind of whispering from beyond the veil that happens. Again, whatever. So I'm not talking about those people again, and I don't have any. I don't have any hate or opprobrium for those folks, right? I'm not anti. People alternative. I mean, it's not for me, right? And I would prefer people don't talk about it, right? Like those who are big on announcing their sexual preference as though that's an identifying factor. Like, hey, I like to kiss the rose, right? I'll eat ass, but I don't introduce myself as, hey, I'm Baldini. I lick butt. I mean, right? It's not. Sorry, didn't mean to go off topic there, but what I'm saying is that people introduce themselves as gay. So you're telling me that your preference is in the sack. I don't care. I don't need to know that. That's not that's not relevant to me. I want to know, who you are and what kind of person you are. I don't care what you like to do under the covers, right? So that is an identifying factor. It seems an odd thing to me, and I wish people would just leave that alone. And clearly it's being pushed as an agenda with the fact that they're doing it and they're shaming people into, if you don't agree with it, then you hate it. No, I don't. I don't have homophobia either. I'm not afraid of it, right? I used to say homonauseous, right? Like two guys kissing kind of grosses me out a little bit. But I don't hate them. And, I don't, I don't know, I don't have any harsh feelings for those people. So the fact that I look into this idea of the transgender agenda and this sort of thing doesn't mean I'm out to get anybody, right? It doesn't mean I hate people or that, I have hatred for these folks. It simply means that I've done some homework and research and realized that there is a high likelihood that because of their belief system and because of what we see as a preponderance of evidence across the board throughout this whole thing, that they're trying to confuse us, and they get a kick out of it. And it's a poke in the eye to present males dressed as females for the sexual gratification of males. Those people who think that they're all male and they would never do that thing, but they've been lusting over or masturbating over, pinup posters of people who are biologically male, and I think that is part of the agenda, right? To confuse people, and I think that that there's a sickness behind it that runs it. And again, my personal take on it is that those who are in control, at least in the human aspect, they're not the ones who are really pulling the strings. They're not bright enough or smart enough or patient enough to do the kinds of things that I've seen happen over a long period of time. This really screams that it's some sort of entity that is mostly unseen but can present itself, is very intelligent, and what we would consider almost immortal, in that it lasts many lifetimes with the same momentum, and they get people to do very similar things for them. So that's my take on it. Again, I reserve the right to be wrong. This is what I see. So in this idea of when you're looking at what makes the difference between those of us who look at things differently, or who are able to open our minds such that we can at least consider these things, and at least consider the possibility of what seems crazy. I think for most of you, you understand that this comes over a matter of time, and it's a process, that it's a journey. From the beginning, it's usually one thing that sort of tips you off. You begin to look into it. You find that the story doesn't add up that they're telling, and that if you can get enough information without trying to defend one position or the other. And to me, this is part of where the danger is. And I see many people, even within our community, who are readily cast aside one belief system for another, that they don't actually do the research. They simply hear somebody say it, whether that's a researcher within the community, or they read a book, or whatever, and then they had simply adopted another viewpoint. Again, not to unnecessarily poke at anybody. I'm telling you my transparent, honest, candid views on things. But when people go really off and they seem to have a stick up their butt about, and they're, the Bible's a book written by men. Okay, so it was, and you can't trust it. It's a bunch of lies. Okay, where'd you get that idea? In a book that I read, written by whom? Right? So, I mean, it's just that there's some hypocrisy there, that you exchange one view for another. And even even to some degrees, in, like, for example, flat earth, people, they reject one view and accept and adopt another, but they don't know anything about it. They don't really know why, or what the evidences are either way. Most people in that community who have done their homework, they know both models really, really well, right? So I know the heliocentric model better than 99% of the people who believe it. And the reason I don't believe it is because I know it so well, right? And I can do physics and math and understand how things work. And so that allows me to cast it aside. But even from the outset, I didn't immediately adopt that new opinion. It took time for me to not only look into it and to do the math, but also to be able to set aside preconceived beliefs and what it would mean for me socially and emotionally and relationally to cast those aside and to adopt a different belief. Because I'm not going to lie. Right, that this is a situation that certainly has been true since my mid-30s. That one of the scariest things that I ever did when I first started doing the counseling is I went through this personal inventory and stuff, and I did a lot of self-work, and what part of that was to become transparent in all my ways and to be completely honest. Well, prior to that, I had a very well-established, very tidy and tight, PR ready bio and history. I had my 30-minute elevator pitch for me, and it wasn't untrue. It was absolutely true, but it wasn't. Well, it was accurate, but I would say maybe it wasn't completely true. It put things as most, like when you're dating, you put everything in its most favorable light, right? You leave out the ugly parts, but those ugly parts are in large part what made me who I am. Those parts of the difficult journeys in my life, those are the parts that really changed and shaped me into the person I am now. And learning to accept that and learning to understand. And I think part of it is too that we understand that we're flawed beings. and we fear that others will not accept us. And I come back to this, that all beings, especially humans, we have not only a desire for, but a need more than life even itself, more than even air, that we need love. But prior to love, we must be accepted, because we can't receive love if we don't believe they accept us. And and it's an interesting thing. One of the well-known phrases from Jesus is the two commandments there: to love the Lord with all your heart, mind, and strength. And the second's just like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. But part of that includes that you must love yourself. And that's part that many, many, many people have difficulty doing. And when you cannot love, at least accept yourself, you cannot for others either. You cannot accept them. But we have difficulty. We struggle with accepting ourselves because we know fundamentally that we're broken. We know that we have these dark things within us. We know that we're flawed beings. And so it is easy. I've always been, in some ways, my own worst critic, and sometimes we're our own worst critic and biggest fan, right? That we kind of go vacillate, especially I find artists and musicians do. They vacillate between a kind of narcissism and a kind of self-deprecation, that we can quickly vacillate between, I'm king of the world and I'm worthless, right? You see this very clearly, for example, in the book of Psalms in the Bible, that David, again, apparently a great musician. He played the harp and was a great songwriter back in the day. He was, had his own mixtapes. But he would go back and forth between I'm a worm to, I'm the best. And that's not uncommon, especially for artists and musicians. But I think it's also common to the human mind overall, that we know, and often we have had it reinforced a lot by the world, that we are worthless. In fact, part of scientism is to impress upon you very hard that you're worthless and meaningless, that you're a speck on a speck on a speck on a speck on a wart on a butt, right? That you're just nothing, that we're not special in any way, and everything is meaningless. It's just nihilistic completely. And that's what scientism really ultimately gives us, is this idea that we have no meaning and that we're valueless. Also, if there's no really accountability, you can do whatever the hell you want, and just as long as it serves me, and that's the do as thou wilt, right? So that's ultimately where most people land, is that they think they come from nothing, they'll return to nothing, and in between get all you can, right, and do that. And so it is one of the first and most important things is to learn to love yourself. And from my own personal experience, that only came as a result from being exposed to what love actually looked like. And for me, that was getting in touch with and learning to be in a relationship with my Creator, who I find to be the very definition of love in every aspect, and not at all what I would expect from an omnipotent being, especially one that was described to me as a youth in a very religious household as being sort of a spiritual motorcycle cop, right? He's got that radar gun. He's going to get you. He's going to write you a ticket and send you to hell. That's kind of what I was exposed to, that this idea of an angry, judgmental God that was always ready to kick you right out, right, at any time. And that's not at all what I discovered when I actually got past the idea that I was going to keep these rules and please him, and realized that I could not, that I just needed to get to know him. And then when I did, I was very surprised to find that he didn't really care about what I did. In fact, told me, those aren't the things I'm concerned about, right? What's wrong with you is that you're broken and you hurt, and those things are what causes your behavior. So if we can heal your heart, all that other stuff will come. And I believed him and them, and so I followed the path, and it was a very difficult and very painful process. But over time, I learned to trust implicitly, and learn that he is good all the time, and I don't have to ask why anymore, because he's not going to answer it. I found he's very poor at answering why, and mostly, in fact, if I want to know about other people, he's like, it's not your story. Doesn't matter. It's not your business, right? Doesn't matter. What you need to do is work on yourself and try to love those around you, and that's a very challenging proposition, I got to tell you, especially those who are unlovely. And what we find, at least I have found, that those who hurt people, right? And so those who are the nastiest and meanest usually need it the most, right? They're usually starving for it, much like you go to pet a dog and they want to bite your hand. That's because they've been mistreated, and it's kind of not the dog's fault. And so it's really sometimes a challenge to do that. So to circle back around here, how does this relate? Well, from my perspective, one of the things that we can get caught up in is the polarization that we've been fed from both sides. The media point tells those who are on the other side, the wool wearing, wool pantsuit wearing folks, or the wearing that shearling coat, right, that they wear with pride and in a kind of almost virtue signaling now, right? They beat their chest at how how much they're up on that news report, right? They know exactly what the situation is, and as I said a couple of weeks ago, the famous quote from Mark Twain is that if you don't read the news, you're uninformed, but if you do, you're misinformed, and because they're lying to you. And so the vast majority of people go with that narrative, and they want to show how much they know by repeating it and adopting it. And so from that perspective, those of us who question the narrative, there's something wrong with us, and we're not only stupid, but we're bad. We're now selfish because we don't wear a mask. We want people to die, right? Because we don't, we're COVID deniers, right? And so to that degree, they've been pushing us into, as they always do, into divide and conquer. So whether that is black and white, whether that is red or blue, whether that is nation against nation, that they always take what we need, which is a feeling of belonging somewhere, right? This acceptance, and so they create acceptance by group dynamics and by the idea that you belong somewhere if you join in and accept this narrative, or you join this mindset. So whether you pick up on politics and join that, or you pick up on religion and it's us versus them, and those unsaved people or those bad people, those sinners or whatever out there, we're better than them. So now I'm better than that. And again, even Jesus had very harsh words to say about the Pharisee who prayed, "Lord, I thank you that I'm not like that sinner over there." Right. So missing the point entirely. But we get drawn into this, and it's very easy to do. And I find even for myself, it does happen that when they throw all this hatred and vitriol at you all the time, and there are a few things more frustrating, right? To have some sub 60 IQ mouth breather go, "You just don't understand how it worked. You don't get it, good. You're dumb." And I want to throat punch them, right? But if I pause for a moment and breathe, I understand why they think that, and I have to have compassion for the fact that they don't have free working brain cells, right? They got one more brain cell than a horse, so they don't shit on the street during a parade. So again, I have to be the adult here and say, okay, sunshine, right? I don't. As I've said before, I don't play chess with pigeons, because they just, they squawk and they knock over all the pieces and shit all over the board and flap away claiming victory. It's just Dunning-Kruger, right? And Dunning-Kruger, if you're not familiar with that expression, it's Dunning-Kruger syndrome essentially is the idea, and I probably should have, I guess, put up a graph of this that demonstrates that when you very first start learning a thing, your confidence level is high, but your skill level is very low. And over time, if you spend time with it, you got to, take this road where once you at the very beginning, you lack the very skills needed to assess your competency. And so you think you're competent, but you realize that you're just, you suck. And then one of the things I found, for example, playing golf, is it was very frustrating at the outset, because when you learn to make a good shot, then suddenly you expected to make good shots all the time. And that just doesn't happen, right? Islands of ecstasy in a sea of despair, right? So in fact, the better you do, the more frustrating it gets. Well, this is kind of true with any skill that you begin to learn, is at the outset, most people have this false sense of competency from the very beginning. If they understand the concepts, they think they can do it. And then they hopefully, over time, they'll learn that they can't. And one of the hallmarks for me of people who at least have some clue about what's going on in the world is that they admit that they don't know anything, right? I continue to say that absolute certainty is the imminent domain frauds and fools. They're either lying to you or they are deluded if they have absolute certainty about most of these things, especially what happens after you die and that sort of stuff. Because I'll tell you what, for sure, nobody here knows and nobody from there is telling. Right. So, again, I just say if people are certain about the nature of the world or what's going on, or that, that there is no God, or what, any of these things where they may know for themselves, and that's fine, right? You do you, and I'll do me, right? So I'm not going to get up in your grill and tell you that what you believe is wrong. I might say that for me that's contradictory to my experience, but everybody gets their own take on it, and everybody gets their own opportunity to choose. And that's one of the things we were given, right, is our will, our right to choose, which is in part why I think they look for our consent with these things. I think that, again, it's easy to get caught up when they push at you and poke at you and give you this nonsense. It's easy to want to push back and to want to slap them around a little bit and give them some comeuppance and tell them what's what. But we fall into the trap, right? We begin to separate ourselves for sure. And what I find as I'm doing this process and hearing from many people is that many of us feel alone and isolated. The numbers are just not high enough, right? I estimate currently in North America that the numbers are somewhere between 0.3 and maybe, I don't even think we're at 0.5%. Because most of us, unless our significant other has come along the ride with us, most of us find ourselves very alone in our families, certainly among friends, coworkers, and very many people have had significant troubles with their significant other and their spouse or their romantic partner because they did not join in this thought, and it creates this conflict. And so it's very, very easy to join in and to accept the polarization that we're being pushed into, especially when they begin more and more to treat us as though we're dangerous, right? That we present a danger to them and other people. And so it is to this that I want to speak directly and say the understanding of misapprehension that we all were at one point in that group of sleeping sheeple, right? Whatever you want to call them. And I try not to use that. It's a descriptive word between us, and we know what it looks like, that they have that fluoride stare or whatever. But I try not to use epithets when talking to others because it doesn't help. And it certainly isn't going to help if I'm trying to plant seeds with them. I can tell you that I rarely see, just like, I've often said about, for example, religion, nobody became, a Christian, or nobody became introduced to their creator because they lost an argument. That's just simply not how it works. It's an emotional, personal, choice and decision, and that's how you get to it. And so you must come through that experience on your own. And from my point of view, it's a relationship. So you can't, you're not going to lose an argument to get into a relationship. It's simply kind of preposterous, really. So having arguments and trying to one up or win an argument with somebody is, to me, not very helpful. And I see many times when people learn this new truth, they want to go tell other people because it becomes it becomes life affirming and life changing when you find out that if you didn't know before that there is a creator, where you live is not floating around in space and that you get blowed up every minute, but you were intentionally made by somebody who loves you and who continually loves you, and that there's a chance to do something good in this world. And that everything you've been told is a lie, you want to tell others, right? You want other people to know this changes your life. And then when they push back on you, it's easy to get frustrated. And so you become more emotionally agitated. Not only are they coming hard against you, but they're ignoring what could save their life, and you care about them, right? You want them to know, I want to set you free. I want you to be released from these bonds of mental slavery that you've put yourself under by believing this garbage. And to your great frustration and enormous dismay, not only will they not, but they cannot, and they cannot see it. And we need to from my perspective, be kind to them and understand that some may never, but it's certainly not going to be helpful for you to drag them kicking and screaming down a rabbit hole. It just makes them fight. I heard Rose 777 do a couple of shows this week with, Globe believers, and one of them, actually fairly, I mean, I didn't listen to all of them, so I'm not saying the others weren't, but one of them was fairly bright, and she was even ENTJ or INTJ, kind of one of most of us, right, in this neck of the woods, and should have been open to the ideas because of the nature of the way that we process data. However, what she did was she prepared for this by learning as much as she could in order to defend it. Then I understood, and it's okay. So you're defending a model because it matters to you, right? It becomes an emotional block or emotional anchor for you, and so in order to continue to hold it, you're going to defend it. So you come unwilling to listen. You're just waiting for an opportunity to defend and to beat the other person up, and to say ultimately it always comes to, you just don't understand. Yeah, we do. We do understand, but you got to be patient. I mean, I heard David Weiss just like he wanted to jump off a cliff, right? Because he wasn't making any progress. And so I thought, I spoke to Rose. I said, hey, we'll try, maybe try again with her or somebody else, because I want to appeal to their curiosity by saying, hey, what if this and what if this? Like, what would that mean to you? Not that I'm trying to convince them, but that I want to appeal to their curiosity. So maybe they want to look into it themselves. And so this is, I think, what I wanted to primarily share with you guys today is these ideas that trying to beat somebody up or, flat smack them or red pill them, and if this is something that you do, I'm not going to tell you that you're doing the wrong thing. I mean, I'm not going to get up and say, you're doing it wrong. But I'm saying if you're not having good success with that, especially if you don't feel comfortable with, all the stuff that they might ask you or press up against you with, that all the arguments, right? Then it may be better to present from time to time some information to get them thinking about it, and to present some dichotomies that don't make any sense, and to let them, if you can hit them with a little cognitive dissonance from time to time, just like, little chinks in the armor, over time they might come back and ask, hey, what about, and I see this now with, again, this CV19 thing presents some opportunities, and that one of the aspects that many people who have woken up have is that they had the opportunity, they had some time to research and study through it. So this may be giving some people when they're home under quarantine the opportunity to look, but also there's so much nonsense going on out there that many people who previously did not think about it now are looking at things. And if you can appeal to them with the idea that, hey, you're supposed to be wearing this mask, but you make your own mask at home. Okay, well, that's a commercial tight weave cotton, might have maybe 50 microns in the weft of the weave, probably more like 150. And this pathogen is supposed to be sub 3 microns, like screen door on a submarine is going to do a better job, right? It's nonsense, right? And so then you put it over, and then the only reason, nurse in the hospital, doctors and nurses wear masks is to prevent their germs from getting into open wounds. It's not to help them. So, ultimately, wearing a mask is not really supposed to protect you. It's supposed to protect others, but they're out there thinking it's going to protect themselves. But, then you've got a hypoxia, a lack of oxygen. You're presenting a warm, wet, moist, dark place to let anything that does get caught grow. You're touching it constantly. You're reusing it. It's nonsense. And yet people are so convinced that it's necessary that if you don't wear one, you're now a danger to others. Right, so they're not thinking it through. So, but if you can present a few pieces of information here and there where they might be able to begin to think about it and begin to kind of wonder, right? And especially those who might be, and this seems to be one of the biggest aspects. And again, in the conversation that I had with Rose that we presented last week, understand that one of the things that I use in this test is the Myers-Briggs Personality Index, or MBTI, which is the Myers-Briggs Type Index, the personality assessment that breaks it down into 16 types from 4 categories. And what I have revealed so far. I'm going to get more into the numbers as we go along, especially as I move toward phase 2. But one of the things that has come up is that the highest number of those who have responded to this study are those who are in some of the lowest categories of the general populace. That is, the intuitive thinkers, the two inside categories that we represent. All aggregated in total, less than 8% of the total. INTJ is a little under 3%. ENTJ, again, 2.5%. You put them all together with the NTs, and it's just a little under 8% of the total population, not even 10%, right? So, but again, keeping in mind that what I think is going on is about 0.3% in terms of those who have woken up versus those who haven't in North America, those who are around me. So, so again, keeping this in mind, it doesn't. I have gotten respondents from every category of MBTI, which doesn't mean that those who are not intuitive thinkers, they might be perceiving feelers. Doesn't mean that they can't do it. It means that they're just less likely. And part of the reason for that is that especially those who are intuitive and sensing and perceiving, if you get those three things in there, those people take most of their understanding from an external point of view. And so they look for outside relevance. They look for other people to give them approval. And it just makes it very difficult for them to break through that, such that they can let go of these notions and these beliefs and be the one who's the odd man out, right? Nobody wants to be the turd in the punch bowl. And you sure don't want to be kicked off the team or the last one picked. So they really struggle with that. And so those are the ones I would say we want to really encourage because they're going to feel very isolated and alone. Those of us who are intuitive thinkers, we understand, I think once we learn the information, we're able to stand on it with such a degree of confidence that we can say, I may not know everything, but I know enough that this is how it is. I can break apart these lies, where others may not be at that point. And so it's their natural disposition to look for external validation. And if they're not getting it, especially if they're getting opprobrium and hostility and ostracization instead, that's going to be so we need to really support them. And so overall, that's where I'm coming from, is that we really want to, well, Mark, you're going to go. I'm going to play. Well, at the very end here, I'm going to play a little bit of some folks talking a little bit about their awakening process. In any case, here's my take again, is that we should be kind to one another. I always say that, but that we want to encourage each other, especially those who have already crossed the threshold but might feel alone. It does seem that we're so far spread out that our only point of contact at this point is primarily through social networking or the internet, that we rarely get a chance to meet in person, and that's unfortunate. So with that, I'm going to share with you a couple of just quick things here. This is, I want to introduce you to Mark, and Mark wanted to, some of the people who gave me their story. And again, if you want to join, I can still let you into the project. It is unintended.consequences3@gmail.com to join the awakening study. What I'm asking for is your date of birth and location. That covers the astrological stuff. Then we have the Myers-Briggs type index. Again, if you know your type, that's fine. If you would take another one, because sometimes we change over time. So take one, any of the free ones, the better free ones will do. 16 personalities, the number 16, personalities.com doesn't ask you any you don't have to register or anything like that. They'll give you 4 letters, and if they offer percentages, use those as well, because many people are on the border. Some people border between, like, for example, the first one is I or E, introvert or extrovert, and you might be 45, 55, right? So kind of right on that line. So if they offer those, include those as well. And then finally, a summary of your own awakening process, and a little bit perhaps about your family of origin, sort of your background, what it was that was your first thing that helped you wake up, how you saw it, and what it's meant to you since then. And so some people have decided. Some people have decided instead to record it instead of writing it out, and which is, I found super great, as a matter of fact. So to that end, let me come here. I just need to find. I think I'm at the right spot here. So I want to share with you Mark's story pretty quick, and then just a little bit from Taylor. So here, if I can get this queued up here, this is going to be Mark's story of his awakening process. It's pretty short, and then I'll share with you a little bit of Taylor, and then we'll wrap up for today.
Hi, this is Mark. I'm going to explain my awakening process. I've always been interested in who we are, how we came to be, etc. One of my earliest memories is when we were travelling to Hungary near Lake Balaton as a family each year in the caravan. During those times, Hungary was a communist country towards the end of the 80s, and I was used to, I think, annoy my dad asking about communism and World War II and everything that had happened after World War II, because I just couldn't get it into my head that everybody had been fighting over freedom and slavery, whatever it may be, to end up in a slavery situation again, where people are ruled by a dictator and oppressed. I just couldn't understand how you can fight for one thing and then give up on those people at the end of it, and they're in the same position as the Germans or whatever were in the beginning. I just couldn't get it into my head, and obviously the older I got, I realised that it's all part of the theatre, the chess pieces on the board. None of it is actually really what it is on the surface or written in the history books. It's all just theatre and chess pieces, two sides of the same coin. But I think I've always been interested in that kind of sort of political outlook, and about 5-6 years ago when I watched a video, and it triggered something in my head, and I started to look at different topics. 9/11, even though I smelt a bit of a rat there in the beginning, I thought 9/11 was just brown people attacking imperialist America for what they'd done. But I started to look into things and consume topics after topic after topic, never really knowing whether what I was reading was true or not, but I was just hungry for knowledge and hungry to discover this new world of alternative truth, let's say. And obviously as you go further down that journey, you realise that some things are a dead end, some things you don't realise are a dead end until way later, until you discover other topics. It was amazing. It was just like a new lease of life, where I was just consuming books, YouTube videos, everything that I could get my hands on. And then after a while I started to realise that everything is a lie. Everything that you're told is upside down. What you're told is black is actually white. What you're told is up is actually down. And the shine started to come off my sort of truth seeking, because I realised that everything was just bollocks. I guess it just there was no, you were trapped in this kind of bubble, whereas it's a little bit like in the Matrix, where the guy was offered the steak, and sometimes it's better to be ignorant and go back to sleep and be in your slumber. At least you got your digital juicy steak to eat. But obviously that's not the case. I prefer to be this way. I like the fact that the knowledge is coming to me, and I can see the world for what it is. And it was rushing to hear what you said, Baldini, that if you know the names of the people that oppress you, they're probably not the people that are oppressing you. I mean, bagging on the Zionist Jews and Illuminati this and Freemasons that, Jewish bankers. I think if you know the names of those guys, they're not the ones that are in control. Now I want to know who we are. Really, I want to know how we can help ourselves and get out of this mire. I think that's where I've come full circle, that I've managed to expunge everything from my mind of how, why, who, and when this all started. Now I can actually get on with kind of moving to the next stage, so that my family and I can thrive in mentally in an environment that we can at least keep the mental drain that is the rest of the world away from us as much as possible, and then hopefully turn over a legacy to my son, where he can step into the world armed with the mental ability to sift through the bollocks and the back to frontness that comes at us from the media and the people that betray their control over the world. Passing on that baton to my son, to make sure that he has the tools to go at the world that I may not have had at the beginning. All the best from the project. Wish you every bit of success. Thanks.
And so that was Mark. And then here's just a little bit from a conversation that I had with Taylor. Just a great little quote.
If you had something that you wanted to tell people, what would it be?
Be kind and listen to your heart.
Yeah, there you go. Be kind and listen to your heart. Okay, guys, thanks very much for coming. I love spending this time with you every week, and I got to tell you, it is the highlight of my week. Often I kind of feel down and kind of worn after a week, and then when I come and spend the time with you guys, it really energizes me and uplifts me. So thank you for coming. And then I want to just, before we go, I didn't get a chance much to keep up with the chat today. I was kind of distracted, by just thinking about what I wanted to tell you today and share with you. So if you've got any questions you want me to answer really quick, I set it to very low latency, so hopefully it's a much lower delay between that and this. And so if you've got any questions or anything you'd like me to add on the end here, I'm happy to and answer the best I can. So I'll give it a couple of seconds for that. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Dawn and Jason and Lee and all of you guys who come every week and support me. It's just a pleasure to get to know you. And I love the spirit that you guys have. And, you're so kind to others despite all this. What does horn have to do with what's going on? Horn. Which one? Horns of Baphomet or, mind controls, Morley. So I'll tell you what. I have promised that I would include some of the old songs that Joe and I wrote together. So I'll add another one here this week. Again, there's always this kind of a disclaimer at the beginning of this, which is that these were never meant for anybody to listen to. These were just guide tracks for some rehearsals for a band that we were just going to practice to. Unfortunately, throughout the years and some moves, and I lost a bunch of stuff in a storage unit. So much of what few original recordings I had went away, and so these are just some of the few things that were left over. But it's kind of what I got. So so much as it is, these are songs that were written from the late 1980s to the mid 1990s with Joe and another friend of mine, Jim, who's now gone. And so we stopped playing for a long time after these. We had about 150 plus songs, and we were doing pretty well as a band. And then that's unfortunate situation came along, and so anyway, these are some of the songs. And so based on some of your nice comments, Joe and I have been talking to each other, and so we're going to try to re-record some of those songs. We've gone over some lyrics. We found 30 or 40 of them that we like, and we're going to maybe try to re-record some of those for you. But this is one called Still, and you might want to understand that I wrote this one when I still believed in the heliocentric model, so you'll hear a couple of lines in there that may tip you off to that. In any case, this one's called Still, and I appreciate you guys being here. Again, thank you so much for coming, and we'll share more stories in the future of your awakening journeys.
Day after day in circular motion,
closer. Hold on to that feeling inside you. Whatever comes, well, soon this will all be over. But I'll be there waiting for you still. Day after day, in circular motion, we fall off the ends of the earth. Night after night, we cry into darkness, ending a day without worth. Year after year, we slip into numbness, reciting the lines we've rehearsed. Hold on to that feeling inside you. Whatever comes, well, soon this will all be over. But I'll be there waiting for you It goes round and round and round and round and round again. Oh, it goes round and round and round and round still.
And for those of you who were kind enough to stick around and put up with that, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you a 2-for-1 special today. While that was playing, I found an old version from the original band that with Deanna singing the lyrics and Jim and I doing backing vocals. So this is one of the original, really old school recording of that same song. So with that, those of you who stuck around get the 2-for-1 special. So all right, here we go. And thanks again for joining me today.
Circular motion, if all of the ends of the Day after day. hold on to that feeling inside you. Whatever comes through, soon this will all be over. But I'll be there waiting for you still. Day